In the bustling city of San Francisco, real estate mogul James Bennett crosses paths with Sarah Harper, a mysterious woman with a secret past. What begins as an act of kindness quickly spirals into a gripping battle for survival as Sarah's family company teeters on the brink of collapse. James Bennett, a well-known real estate developer in San Francisco, was having one of those days where nothing seemed to go right. Deals were slipping through his fingers, and he felt the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. The city, usually his playground of opportunity, felt like a maze with no exit. After a long day at the office, he decided to take a different route home, hoping a change of scenery might clear his mind. As he walked through the less glamorous parts of San Francisco, James couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his world of luxury and the harsh realities faced by those around him. The sight of tents lining the sidewalks and people huddled under thin blankets made him uneasy. He had seen this before, but today it felt different, more personal, more inescapable. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw her, a young woman, sitting alone on the cold pavement. Her clothes were worn, and her hair was disheveled, but there was something about her that caught his eye. She wasn't like the others. There was a quiet dignity in the way she sat, a sense of purpose even in her apparent despair. James slowed his pace as he approached her. She looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment, James felt a connection, something he couldn't quite explain. Without thinking, he stopped and knelt beside her. "Hi, I'm James," he said, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "Is there anything I can do to help you?" The woman hesitated, clearly surprised by the sudden attention from someone like him. "I'm fine, really," she replied, her voice soft but firm. James didn't believe her. He could see she was trying to maintain her pride, but the truth was written all over her face. "How long have you been out here?" he asked gently. She sighed, looking away. "Too long," she admitted after a moment. "But I'm managing." There was something about her that intrigued James, something that made him want to know more. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she replied, her eyes meeting his again. "Sarah Harper." The name didn't ring any bells, but James felt a strange sense of familiarity. "Sarah, I can't just leave you out here," he said, his tone more insistent now. "I can offer you a place to stay, at least for tonight. And if you're interested, I might have some work for you." Sarah looked at him skeptically. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." James smiled slightly. "Maybe I'm just a sucker for a good story. Or maybe I just don't want to walk away knowing I could have done something and didn't." Sarah studied him for a moment before nodding. "Okay, I'll go with you, but only for tonight." As they walked back to James's car, he couldn't help but wonder what had led her to this point. Sarah seemed too intelligent, too composed, to be living on the streets. There had to be more to her story. Once they reached his penthouse apartment, Sarah hesitated at the door, clearly uncomfortable with the lavish surroundings. "This is where you live?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah," James replied, a bit sheepishly. "It's home." Sarah nodded, though she still seemed unsure. James showed her to a guest room, trying to make her feel at ease. "Take your time," he said. "There's food in the kitchen, and if you need anything, just let me know." Sarah thanked him quietly and closed the door behind her. James stood there for a moment, lost in thought. He didn't usually bring strangers into his home, but something about Sarah made him break all his usual rules. Later that night, as James sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about Sarah. It wasn't just her situation. There was a depth to her that he couldn't quite place. He resolved to find out more, but for now, he was content knowing she was safe. In the morning, James found Sarah in the kitchen, already dressed and looking more put together than she had the night before. She had made coffee and was sitting at the table, staring out the window at the city skyline. "Morning," James greeted her, taking a seat across from her. "Morning," she replied, offering him a small smile. "I wanted to thank you for last night." "You didn't have to do that." James shrugged. "It was nothing." "Really?" Sarah seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "I don't want to impose, but if the job offer still stands, I'd like to take you up on it." James smiled. "Absolutely. We'll figure something out." As they discussed her potential role at his company, Sarah seemed more at ease. But James couldn't help but notice that she was still holding something back. There was a mystery to her that he was determined to unravel. Little did he know, Sarah Harper was not who she appeared to be. She had a secret, one that would soon turn James's world upside down. For now, though, that secret remained hidden, as the two of them embarked on a journey neither of them could have anticipated. The first few weeks of Sarah Harper's employment at Bennett Development were a whirlwind. James had set her up with a modest role in the company, giving her a chance to find her footing while she got back on her feet. Sarah quickly proved herself to be more than capable, surprising James with her sharp mind and keen understanding of the real estate market. It wasn't long before she was handling more significant tasks, even offering insights that made James reconsider some of his own strategies. But as their professional relationship grew, so did the unspoken tension between them. James couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was still hiding something, even as she immersed herself in her work. Her polished demeanor and the ease with which she navigated complex projects seemed out of place for someone who had been living on the streets just weeks before. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, James found Sarah in the company's rooftop garden, staring out at the city below. The night was clear, and the lights of San Francisco shimmered like stars scattered across the landscape. "Hey," James called out as he approached her. Sarah turned, offering a tired smile. "Hey, long day?" he asked, leaning on the railing beside her. "Yeah," she replied, her voice carrying a hint of something deeper, something that had been weighing on her. They stood in silence for a moment, both of them lost in their thoughts. Finally, James broke the silence. "You're really good at this, you know? Real estate, I mean." Sarah let out a soft laugh. "Thanks. I've had experience." James nodded, sensing this was his moment to probe a bit deeper. "You've been with us for a while now, and you've done some incredible work, but I can't help but feel like there's more to your story than you're letting on." Sarah's smile faded, replaced by a guarded expression. "What do you mean?" James turned to face her, his gaze steady. "I mean, you're clearly not just someone who happened to end up on the streets. You're too smart, too knowledgeable. What's your story, Sarah?" For a long moment, Sarah said nothing, her eyes locked on the distant horizon. James could see the internal struggle playing out in her mind. Finally, she sighed and looked at him, her expression softening. "You're right," she admitted. "I haven't been completely honest with you." James's heart skipped a beat. He had known there was more to Sarah, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel real, more significant. "I didn't end up on the streets by accident," Sarah began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I was conducting research. I was trying to understand the housing crisis from the ground level, to see how it affects people firsthand." James blinked, taken aback. "Research? What kind of research?" Sarah hesitated before continuing. "I'm not just some random person, James. My full name is Sarah Harper Windsor. My family, they're one of the oldest and wealthiest in San Francisco. I'm the heir to the Windsor estate." James felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. The Windsors were a household name, known for their vast wealth and deep roots in the city's history. But the idea that Sarah, his Sarah, was a part of that world seemed surreal. "I was supposed to take over the family business," Sarah continued, her voice growing quieter. "But I couldn't stand the idea of managing something I didn't fully understand. So, I left. I wanted to see the other side of the coin, to experience the struggles of those less fortunate. It was supposed to be a short-term thing, but then I met you." James was silent, processing everything she had just revealed. It explained so much: her poise, her knowledge, her ability to adapt so quickly to the business. But it also raised more questions. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I didn't want to be treated differently," Sarah replied, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "I've seen how people change when they find out who I am. I wanted to be judged on my own merits, not my family's name." James nodded slowly. "I get that, but why tell me now?" Sarah looked away, her gaze returning to the cityscape. "Because I'm done with the research. It's time for me to go back to my life." "But," she paused, her voice trembling slightly, "I didn't expect to meet someone like you, someone who cares about more than just money and power." James's heart pounded in his chest. He took a step closer to her, reaching out to gently touch her arm. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to. You could stay here, with me, with the company." "We could." Sarah shook her head, cutting him off. "James, I can't stay. My family needs me. But that doesn't mean I want to leave you behind." There was a long silence as they both wrestled with their emotions. James's mind raced, trying to find a solution, a way to keep Sarah in his life. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah turned to face him fully, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You won't," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll figure this out. I'm not saying goodbye, James. I'm just changing course." Before James could respond, Sarah took a step forward, closing the distance between them. She hesitated for just a moment before leaning in, her lips brushing his in a tentative, yet electrifying kiss. James responded immediately, pulling her closer as the world around them seemed to fade away. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Not really." James nodded, his own eyes misting over. "We'll figure this out. Together." And in that moment, beneath the starlit sky of San Francisco, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The connection between them was undeniable, and it was only growing stronger. But as Sarah prepared to return to her family and the life she had left behind, neither of them could have predicted the storm that was about to descend on their newfound bond. A storm that would test their love and their resolve in ways they never imagined. Sarah Harper Windsor returned to her family estate with a heavy heart. The sprawling Windsor mansion, with its grandiose architecture and perfectly manicured lawns, had always felt more like a museum than a home. As the heir to the Windsor legacy, Sarah had a responsibility she could no longer avoid. Her brief departure into the world outside her privileged life had given her perspective, but now, she had to face the reality she had left behind. The moment she stepped through the massive oak doors, she was greeted by her father's trusted advisor, Charles Lawson, a man she had known since childhood. His usually composed demeanor was now strained, his face lined with stress. "Miss Sarah," Charles said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk." Sarah followed him to her father's study, where the atmosphere was thick with tension. Her father, Richard Windsor, sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking more worn and frail than she remembered. He was a man who had always exuded strength and control, but now, he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Sarah, it's good to have you back," Richard said, his voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. "What's going on, Dad?" Sarah asked, taking a seat across from him. Richard sighed deeply, exchanging a glance with Charles before speaking. "The company, it's in serious trouble. We're facing a financial crisis that could ruin us." Sarah's heart sank. She had known there were issues within the family business, but she hadn't realized just how dire the situation had become. "How did this happen?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Charles cleared his throat, stepping forward. "We've been misled by someone we trusted. Harold Peterson, our financial advisor, has been embezzling funds for years. We didn't catch it until it was too late. The damage is extensive, and our liquidity is almost entirely drained." Sarah felt a surge of anger. Harold had been with the company for as long as she could remember. He had been like family, yet he had betrayed them all. "What are our options?" she asked, her mind racing with possibilities. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "There's only one option that seems viable at this point, a merger." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "A merger? With whom?" Charles hesitated, his expression grim. "The Kingston Corporation." Sarah's blood ran cold. The Kingston family had been rivals to the Windsors for generations. Their business practices were ruthless, and their desire to absorb Windsor enterprises had always been thinly veiled. The idea of merging with them was unthinkable. "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly. "There has to be another way." Richard shook his head sadly. "I wish there were, Sarah, but we're out of time. The Kingston Corporation has made an offer to buy us out, but they're only willing to proceed if certain conditions are met. Sarah's stomach churned. What conditions? At this, both Richard and Charles exchanged uneasy glances before Charles spoke. They've proposed a personal merger as well. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? They want you to marry William Kingston, Charles said, the words heavy with implication. It's the only way they'll agree to save the company. Sarah recoiled as if struck. William Kingston was the last person on earth she wanted to be tied to. He was known for his cold, calculating demeanor and his relentless pursuit of power. The idea of marrying him, of being forced into such a union, was abhorrent. No, Sarah whispered, shaking her head. I can't do that. I won't. Sarah, please, Richard implored, his voice breaking. If there were another way, I'd take it. But the company, everything our family has built, will be destroyed. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. This is the only way to save it. Sarah's mind spun as she tried to process the enormity of the situation. She had come back to help her family, not to be sacrificed in a corporate power play. Yet, the weight of her father's words pressed down on her. The lives of so many people depended on Windsor Enterprises, and if it collapsed, the fallout would be catastrophic. But there must be another solution, Sarah said, desperation creeping into her voice. We can sell assets, restructure the debt, do something else, anything but this. Charles shook his head. We've looked at every possible option, Sarah. The only way to avoid bankruptcy and keep the company afloat is through this merger. Sarah stood up, her body trembling with anger and fear. I won't be forced into a marriage for the sake of the company, she declared. There has to be another way, and I'm going to find it. With that, she stormed out of the study, her mind racing. She needed to think, to figure out a way to save her family's legacy without losing herself in the process. There was only one person she could turn to, James. Later that evening, Sarah arrived at James's penthouse, her emotions swirling in a storm of frustration and fear. When he opened the door and saw her face, his concern was immediate. Sarah, what's wrong? He asked, guiding her inside. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. It's my family, the company. It's worse than I thought. James sat beside her, his hand gently rubbing her back in comfort. Tell me what's going on. She took a deep breath and told him everything. The embezzlement, the financial crisis, and the Kingston's proposal. As she spoke, James's expression darkened with anger. They want you to marry William Kingston? He repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. That's insane. I know, Sarah said, her voice cracking. But my father, he thinks it's the only way to save the company. James, I don't know what to do. James took her hands in his eyes filled with determination. You don't have to do this, Sarah. There's always another way. We just have to find it. But how? She asked, tears welling up in her eyes. The numbers don't lie. We're on the brink of bankruptcy. James's mind raced as he considered their options. He was a master at turning impossible situations around, and he wasn't about to let the Kingstons win. Not like this. I'll help you, James said firmly. We'll figure this out together. There has to be a way to save the company without you having to marry William. Sarah looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. You think we can do it? I know we can, James replied, his voice filled with conviction. We're not going to let them push you into this. We'll find a way. As they sat together, their hands intertwined, a sense of resolve settled over them. They had faced challenges before, but this was different. This was personal. And so, with James by her side, Sarah prepared to fight for her family, for her future, and for the love that was growing between them. Little did they know, the battle ahead would test them in ways they could never have imagined, with stakes higher than they had ever faced before. The days that followed were a blur of frantic activity. James and Sarah worked tirelessly, poring over financial statements, reviewing contracts, and brainstorming every possible solution to save Windsor Enterprises. They knew time was running out, and the looming threat of Sarah's forced marriage to William Kingston hung over them like a dark cloud. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah's phone buzzed with constant calls from her family, particularly her father, who was growing increasingly desperate. The pressure on Sarah was immense, and the strain began to show. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her once steady hands trembled as she signed off on documents. The weight of her family's expectations and the looming threat of the marriage deal gnawed at her every waking moment. James could see the toll it was taking on her, and his resolve to protect her only grew stronger. He knew they were running out of time, but he refused to let Sarah be coerced into a life she didn't want. The thought of her with William Kingston was unbearable. One evening, after yet another exhausting day of strategizing, James pulled Sarah aside. They were in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers and whiteboards filled with calculations and notes. The city skyline twinkled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. "Sarah, we need to talk," James said, his voice firm but gentle. Sarah looked up from the document she was reviewing, her eyes tired and red from lack of sleep. "What is it?" she asked, her voice flat, drained of emotion. James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I know this is overwhelming, and I know you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I'm here with you, every step of the way." Sarah's gaze softened, and she set the document aside. "I know, James, and I'm so grateful for everything you're doing, but I don't see a way out of this. My father is adamant that the merger with Kingston is the only solution." "There is another way," James insisted, his eyes locking onto hers. "We've been going through every asset, every piece of the business, trying to find a solution, and I think I have a plan." Sarah's interest peaked. "What plan?" James walked over to one of the whiteboards, where he had drawn up a new strategy. "Windsor Enterprises has a lot of non-essential assets, properties and ventures that aren't critical to the core business. If we sell them off and use the proceeds to pay down the most pressing debts, we can stabilize the company enough to buy us some time. But that won't be enough to cover everything," Sarah said, frowning as she followed his explanation. "No, it won't," James admitted, "but it's a start. And with the pressure off, we can renegotiate the remaining debts. I've been in touch with some of your company's creditors, and they're willing to extend the terms if we show good faith by paying off a significant portion up front." Sarah studied the plan on the board, her mind racing. It was risky, but it was the best option they had. "And you think this will work?" she asked, hope creeping into her voice. James nodded confidently. "I do, but we have to move fast. The Kingstons won't wait forever, and we need to show them that we have an alternative plan." Sarah looked at him, a sense of determination settling over her. "Then let's do it. I won't let them force me into that marriage. We'll save the company our way." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as James and Sarah executed the plan. They met with potential buyers for the non-essential assets, negotiated deals, and worked closely with the Windsor team to manage the sales. It was a race against time, but with each step, they grew more confident that they were on the right track. But the Kingstons were not sitting idly by. As word of the sales and restructuring reached them, they realized that their plan to corner the Windsors into the merger might fail. William Kingston, furious at the prospect of losing both the company and his leverage over Sarah, decided to take matters into his own hands. One evening, as Sarah was returning to James's penthouse after a particularly grueling day, she found William Kingston waiting for her in the lobby. He was impeccably dressed, as always, but there was a coldness in his eyes that sent a shiver down her spine. "Sarah," William said smoothly, stepping forward to block her path. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you, William," Sarah replied, trying to push past him. William grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "You're making a mistake. My father won't take this lightly, and you know what that means. Call off whatever foolish plan you and your boyfriend have cooked up and do what's best for your family." Sarah yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing with anger. "I won't be bullied by you or your father." "The answer is no." William's expression hardened. "This isn't over, Sarah. You'll regret this." With that, he turned and walked out of the building, leaving Sarah shaken but resolute. She hurried upstairs, her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived at the penthouse, she found James waiting for her, concern etched on his face. "What happened?" he asked, immediately sensing her distress. "William," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He was waiting for me downstairs. He tried to threaten me into calling off our plan." James's eyes darkened with fury. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah said, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "But I don't think the Kingstons are going to let this go without a fight." James pulled her into a reassuring embrace. "Let them try. We're not backing down." The next morning, James and Sarah received an urgent call from one of Windsor Enterprises' key creditors. The Kingstons had contacted them, offering to pay off the Windsor debts in exchange for control of the company. It was a direct attempt to undermine their plan, and it threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. But James was ready. He had anticipated this move and had already lined up a backup plan. He quickly arranged a meeting with the creditor, presenting them with the sales agreements for the non-essential assets and demonstrating Windsor Enterprises' commitment to paying down its debts independently. After a tense negotiation, the creditor agreed to stick with the Windsors, rejecting the Kingstons' offer. It was a significant victory, but the fight wasn't over yet. The Kingstons were relentless, using every tactic at their disposal to sabotage the restructuring plan. They spread rumors, tried to manipulate other creditors, and even attempted to block the asset sales through legal channels. Through it all, James and Sarah stood firm, their resolve only strengthening as the challenges mounted. They worked tirelessly, side by side, facing every obstacle together. Their bond grew deeper with each passing day, fueled by the knowledge that they were fighting not just for the company, but for their future together. Finally, after weeks of intense effort, the last piece of the plan fell into place. The sales were completed, the debts were restructured, and Windsor Enterprises was stabilized. The company was safe, and Sarah was free from the Kingstons' grasp. As the final documents were signed, Sarah looked at James, tears of relief and gratitude filling her eyes. "We did it," she whispered, hardly able to believe it. James smiled, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We did, and we did it together." For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to relax, savoring the victory they had fought so hard to achieve. But even as they celebrated, they knew the battle wasn't completely over. The Kingstons had been thwarted, but their defeat had come at a cost. There would be consequences, and they would have to be ready for whatever came next. But for now, they had one. And as they stood together, looking out over the city that had become the backdrop to their struggles, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, stronger and more united than ever before. The weeks following the stabilization of Windsor Enterprises brought a semblance of normalcy, but underneath the surface, tensions still simmered. Sarah and James had successfully navigated the immediate threat posed by the Kingstons, but the victory was bittersweet. The city's elite watched closely, and whispers of the recent turmoil echoed through the boardrooms and upscale social gatherings. One evening, as Sarah and James reviewed quarterly reports at the penthouse, an unexpected knock echoed through the luxurious space. "Come in," James called, looking up from the documents. The door opened to reveal Charlotte Windsor, Sarah's older sister, whose relationship with Sarah had always been complicated. Unlike Sarah, Charlotte had embraced the family's legacy without reservation, taking a leading role in the company's public relations. "Sarah, James," Charlotte greeted, her expression tense. "We need to discuss some troubling developments." Sarah motioned for her sister to sit, concern evident in her eyes. "What's going on, Charlotte?" Charlotte took a deep breath, her demeanor serious. "There have been some unsettling rumors circulating about the company's financial practices. Despite our recent restructuring, it seems there are factions within the Windsor family who are unhappy with the changes and are trying to undermine our efforts." James leaned forward, his analytical mind already at work. "Do you have any leads on who's behind this?" Charlotte nodded. "A few of our junior executives have been acting suspiciously. They've been tampering with internal reports and leaking information to competitors. It's clear they're trying to destabilize what we've built." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Internal sabotage was a serious threat, one that could unravel all their hard work. "We need to get to the bottom of this. Can we trust the current staff?" Charlotte hesitated. "There are loyalists, but these dissenters are well hidden. We need someone we can trust completely to investigate discreetly." James met Sarah's gaze, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We can handle it. I'll take a closer look at the internal data and see if I can identify any irregularities. Sarah, your undercover experience might also provide insights into how to navigate this." Sarah nodded, her determination rekindled. "I'll help in any way I can. We can't afford to have the company torn apart from within." As they delved into the investigation, Sarah's past experience proved invaluable. She used her skills to discreetly gather information, uncovering a network of conspirators within the company. The trail led her to unexpected places, revealing that the unrest was fueled not only by internal ambition, but also by lingering resentment over the recent restructuring and the new partnership with the Kingstons. One night, while going through a particularly sensitive set of documents, Sarah stumbled upon a name that sent a chill down her spine: Harold Peterson. Although the embezzlement scandal had been resolved, it seemed that Harold had left behind a network of allies determined to seek revenge against the Windsors. Determined to confront the threat, Sarah and James set up a meeting with their loyal executives, laying out the evidence and strategizing on how to neutralize the internal saboteurs. The process was arduous, requiring both diplomacy and firmness to regain control and trust within the company. Meanwhile, Eleanor Kingston, who had joined the Windsor board as part of the new partnership, sensed the growing instability. Her own motivations were complex. While she genuinely sought a peaceful alliance, she was also navigating the intricate politics of her family, who were not entirely pleased with the direction the partnership was taking. One evening, Eleanor approached Sarah in the penthouse lounge. "I've been thinking about the internal issues you're facing," she began. "There might be a way I can help, using the resources and connections at my disposal." Sarah appreciated the offer, understanding that Eleanor's support could be pivotal. "We'd be grateful for any assistance you can provide." As the days turned into weeks, the combined efforts of Sarah, James, and Eleanor began to root out the internal dissent. The saboteurs were identified and dealt with, either through dismissal or negotiated agreements, restoring stability to Windsor Enterprises. However, just as the team began to breathe a sigh of relief, a new, more sinister threat emerged. A series of cyber attacks targeted the company's databases, threatening to expose sensitive information and ruin their reputation. The attacks were sophisticated, indicating the involvement of a highly skilled hacker or an organized group with access to advanced technology. James immediately mobilized his network of IT experts, working alongside external cybersecurity firms to counter the breaches. Meanwhile, Sarah leveraged her research skills to trace the origins of the attacks, uncovering a link to a shadowy organization known for corporate espionage. As the situation escalated, James and Sarah found themselves racing against time to protect the company's assets and reputation. The stress took its toll, and the weight of leadership bore heavily on both of them. Despite the challenges, their bond grew stronger, their shared mission forging an unbreakable partnership. In the midst of the crisis, a breakthrough came when Detective Laura Bennett, who had been assisting with the financial investigation, identified a pattern in the cyber attacks that pointed directly to William Kingston's remaining allies. It became clear that William, though legally defeated, still had the means and will to sabotage the Windsors from the shadows. Determined to end the conflict once and for all, Sarah and James devised a plan to confront the organization head-on. With Eleanor's support, they coordinated a series of strategic moves to isolate the attackers and sever their ties to the Kingston legacy. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the city's financial district. With evidence in hand and law enforcement on their side, Sarah, James, and Eleanor led a coordinated operation to dismantle the remaining elements of William Kingston's network. The operation was a success, culminating in the arrest of key conspirators and the neutralization of the cyber threat. As the dust settled, Windsor Enterprises stood stronger than ever. The trials they had faced had not only tested their resilience, but had also solidified their unity and commitment to one another. That night, as they celebrated their hard-earned victory, Sarah and James reflected on their journey. The challenges they had overcome had forged a deep connection between them, one that promised to endure beyond the corporate battles. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her hand finding James's. "Together." James smiled, pulling her into a warm embrace. "Always together." As they looked out over the city skyline, now a symbol of their triumph and the new beginnings they had forged, They knew that the future held endless possibilities. The legacy of Windsor Enterprises was secure, and their partnership had blossomed into something far more profound, a testament to their unwavering dedication and the love that had grown between them. Little did they know, the final chapter of their story was yet to be written, as they prepared to embrace the new era they had created, ready to face whatever challenges and joys lay ahead. The city of San Francisco had never looked more beautiful. The lights of the Golden Gate Bridge glowed softly in the distance as the evening settled into a quiet, peaceful calm. From the balcony of James Bennett's penthouse, Sarah Harper Windsor stood beside him, her hand resting comfortably in his. The battles they had fought, the victories they had won, all led to this moment of tranquil reflection. But the calm didn't erase the intensity of what they had been through. Windsor Enterprises had been saved, but at a cost. Relationships had been strained, alliances tested, and enemies made. Yet, standing there with James, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had weathered the storm together, emerging stronger and more united. "You know," James began, breaking the silence, "there were times when I wasn't sure we'd make it. But looking at you now, I can't imagine my life any other way." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes soft with affection. "We've been through so much, James, and I know the challenges aren't over. But whatever comes next, I'm ready, as long as we're together." James smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you, Sarah." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had sensed something different in James over the past few days, a quiet determination that she couldn't quite place. "What is it?" she asked, her voice filled with anticipation. James took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket. When he pulled out a small, velvet box, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He opened it to reveal a stunning engagement ring, the diamond catching the light and sparkling with a brilliance that took her breath away. "Sarah, from the moment I met you, my life changed in ways I never imagined. We've built something incredible together, and I can't see my future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at the man who had stood by her side through every trial, every triumph. Her heart was full, overflowing with love and certainty. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, James, I'll marry you." James slid the ring onto her finger, and as they embraced, the world around them seemed to fade away. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the love they shared and the future they were about to build together. The weeks following their engagement were filled with a flurry of activity. Planning a wedding, managing the company, and dealing with the remnants of the conflicts they had overcome left them little time to rest. Yet, despite the chaos, Sarah and James were happier than they had ever been. Their bond had been tested by fire, and it had only grown stronger. However, the Kingstons were not entirely out of the picture. William Kingston, humiliated and defeated, had retreated from the public eye, but his father, Robert Kingston, was still a force to be reckoned with. He had not forgiven the Windsors for outmaneuvering him, and his quiet, simmering resentment remained a looming presence. As Sarah and James prepared for their wedding, whispers of a new challenge began to circulate. Robert Kingston had begun to consolidate his power, making moves that suggested he was not done with Windsor Enterprises. The board of directors, though loyal, grew nervous, and the stability they had worked so hard to achieve seemed precarious once again. One afternoon, as Sarah was finalizing details for the wedding, she received a call from Eleanor Kingston. They had become allies, if not friends, through the ordeal, and Eleanor's voice carried a note of urgency. "Sarah, I need to meet with you," Eleanor said, her tone serious. "There's something you need to know." They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, away from prying eyes. When Sarah arrived, she found Eleanor already seated, her expression tense. "What's going on, Eleanor?" Sarah asked as she took a seat. Eleanor leaned in, her voice low. "My father, Robert. He's planning something. I'm not entirely sure what, but he's been making moves behind the scenes, consolidating resources, and reaching out to some of the more unscrupulous players in the industry." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think he's going to come after the company again?" Eleanor nodded grimly. "I'm almost certain of it. He's still furious about the merger falling through and blames you and James for the family's recent losses. Whatever he's planning, it's going to be big. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the information. They had just barely emerged from one battle, and now it seemed another was on the horizon. Thank you for telling me, Eleanor. I'll talk to James, and we'll figure out how to handle this. As they parted ways, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this new threat was even more dangerous than the last. Robert Kingston was not a man to be underestimated, and if he was planning something, it would be meticulously calculated. Back at the penthouse, Sarah relayed everything to James. His reaction was calm, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "We knew he wouldn't go quietly," James said, his voice steady. "But we're ready for this. We've been through worse." Sarah nodded, but the unease in her chest remained. "I just don't want our future to be overshadowed by this feud. We deserve a chance to be happy, without looking over our shoulders." James took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "We will be happy, Sarah, and we'll deal with Robert Kingston together, just like we've handled everything else." As they prepared for what might be the final confrontation with the Kingston family, Sarah and James drew strength from each other. The wedding was fast approaching, and they refused to let Robert's machinations ruin their plans. They intensified security around Windsor Enterprises, reached out to allies, and ensured that their defenses were impenetrable. Finally, the day of the wedding arrived. It was a beautiful, sunlit day, and the ceremony was held at a picturesque estate overlooking the bay. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to celebrate the union of two people who had faced the world together and emerged victorious. As Sarah walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with emotion. She saw James waiting for her at the altar, his smile warm and reassuring. In that moment, all the challenges, all the threats, seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the love they shared and the life they were about to start together. The ceremony was perfect, filled with laughter, tears of joy, and heartfelt vows. As they exchanged rings, the world seemed to stand still, the significance of the moment not lost on anyone present. "I promise to stand by your side, no matter what comes our way," James said, his voice filled with love and conviction. "And I promise to face every challenge with you, to never let anything come between us," Sarah replied, her voice trembling with emotion. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the guests erupted into applause, celebrating the union of two souls who had found each other in the midst of chaos and had built something beautiful together. But the world outside their wedding continued to turn, and Robert Kingston's plans began to unfold. A series of legal challenges, financial maneuvers, and covert attacks on Windsor Enterprises began to emerge, designed to destabilize the company once again. Yet, despite the escalating tension, Sarah and James faced the threats with a united front. They had built a team of loyal allies, fortified the company's defenses, and were ready to confront Robert Kingston head-on. In the end, it was not just their strategic acumen that won the day, but their unshakable resolve and the deep love they shared. Every move Robert made was countered, every attack deflected, and as the final pieces of his plan fell apart, it became clear that the Windsor-Bennett alliance was too strong to break. Defeated and outmaneuvered, Robert Kingston was forced to retreat, his power diminished and his influence waning. The threat that had loomed over their future was finally vanquished. As the dust settled, Sarah and James looked toward the future with hope and excitement. The battles they had fought had only made them stronger, and now, they were free to build the life they had always dreamed of, together. In the years that followed, Windsor Enterprises flourished under their leadership, becoming a symbol of resilience and innovation. But more importantly, Sarah and James found happiness not just in their success, but in the quiet moments they shared, the love that had carried them through every storm. As they stood together, looking out over the city that had been the backdrop to their incredible journey, they knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them side by side. Partners, lovers, and unstoppable forces in a world that had tried and failed to tear them apart.